have to object to us having so much information go out about my personal information in that jury questionnaire. Do you not think that was a problem?
What personal information?
The state versus Lori Daybell.
What's the name of the case?
People are just going to Google it, and then we're going to have the same exact problem we had getting a jury for that case. We're going to have the same exact problem.
Are you done? Are you just going to keep...
Your Honor?
Yes.
I have to ask that you would recuse yourself from the obvious personal bias that you have against me.
Lori's lashing out in court, asking the judge to recuse himself, but the judge isn't having it. We are spotlighting the spat this morning. And a big day in New York City. A star witness, Cassie Ventura, begins her cross-examination. Plus, telling Diddy's story in a whole new way. We're taking you inside the courtroom using artificial intelligence. Also coming up for you this hour, John O'Keefe's niece testifying about the tense arguments between her uncle and the defendant. So will her testimony help with the second-degree murder charge? We'll talk about it. It's all coming up next for you right here on Opening Statement. Good Thursday morning to you, or should I say happy Friday Eve. We're almost there at the end of the week. I'm Julie Grant. This is Opening Statements. We've got a great show planned for you, so let's get it started like we always do. Grab that cup of coffee. It's time for my opening statement. Cult Mom, you're just wrong. The judge isn't biased against you. He's got the patience of Job. You just need to realize that you're not right about everything. My friends, Lori Daybell had a pretrial hearing on Wednesday for her upcoming attempted homicide case, and she told the judge that he should recuse himself. She accused him of having personal bias against her. Did we all watch the same trial? Judge Justin Bareski went above and beyond to ensure that Ms. Daybell's rights were protected. He treated her with professionalism at all times. He made thoughtful, well-reasoned legal decisions. He was superb. And Cult Mom now has the nerve to criticize him and ask him to recuse himself. Come on. But wait, how about the judge told her to start filing motions with merit, and then perhaps she'll get a better ruling. You go, judge. You ought to be given a medal for tolerating her. Cult Mom, the judge isn't biased. You are just wrong. That's my opening statement, and we're going to be talking more about Lori Daybell's spat with the judge coming up later this hour. But first, it's time for your daily docket.
Where are you headed?
We're going to well, we're coming from WSU.
So you're coming from Washington State University?
Yeah.
And you're going where? Oh.
We're going to be going to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
In Idaho, we have got accused killer Brian Kohberger back in court for a pretrial conference. That's going to begin at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. In Massachusetts, we've got the prosecution's case continuing in defendant Karen Reed's retrial. Court's going to resume at 9 a.m. We'll go there live when it does. And in New York City, Diddy's sex trafficking trial resumes at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time with more testimony from Cassie. And that is, of course, your top story on this Thursday. Cassie set to be crossed this morning. Court TV legal correspondent Kelly Craft is outside the courthouse with more.
Good morning to you, Julie. It will be another big day inside the courtroom here in New York City for the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial. Cassie Ventura, she will be back on the stand, this time for cross-examination. During direct examination, Cassie was extremely emotional, crying several times as she testified about contemplating suicide, going to rehab, and when she says Sean Combs raped her. The jury also viewed still shots of those freak-offs. Many jurors visibly shaken with what they saw. We caught up with Cassie's attorney after court ended on Wednesday. Here's what he had to say.
She's holding up strong. I mean, having to recount what happened during those 10 years and beyond, and talking about her contemplation of suicide, really just very powerful.
Sean Combs' children also in court again today, as well as Alex Fine, Cassie's husband. Ventura testified that she and Combs would occasionally go to sex clubs. She was always drunk, she said, during those times because I did not want to be there sober. Ventura said Combs wanted them to have a swingers lifestyle. She testified that she told her mother about the physical violence, but not the freak-offs. I didn't tell my mom the truth because I was ashamed. She said I couldn't hurt her like that. Ventura also recounted the time Combs lunched at her with a wine opener when he found out that she was dating rapper Kid Cudi. She said she dated Cudi when she and Combs were on a break. Combs found out about Ventura and Cudi when he went through her phone. Julie, court proceedings begin at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. That's the latest from here in New York City. Back to you.
All right, our thanks to Kelly Craft for that early update. Now let's talk about how is Cassie Ventura preparing for what will surely be a pretty grueling, intense cross-examination. Let's bring in our guest in the studio with me. I'm so glad to have domestic violence expert and former law enforcement officer Claudia King and remotely celebrity attorney John Phillips. John, my legal eagle here, I want to start with you, please. How might the government have prepped Cassie for this big moment?
You never want to over-prep a witness, particularly as the government, because that'll be used on cross-examination. They can ask questions like, what did they do? How did you prepare? What did they say? But on the same token, this is an essential witness. She's the one that we knew about the video. She's the one that they knew, linked up these sex parties to a level of extortion. And so they, the old adage, a trial lawyer always knows the answer to the question before he asks it. They had a lot of preliminary work to make sure that they told, as tight of a story as possible and got her ready for cross-examination.
Great points, John. Claudia, I want to ask you about something that's kind of a head scratcher. So as a domestic violence expert, help us understand this. It came out on Wednesday that Cassie admitted to sometimes initiating fights with Sean Combs. So she said sometimes she would initiate them, but also she said at the same time didn't have the resources to leave. I understand the government is going to be calling a domestic violence expert to try to make sense of that. How do you think they'll do that?
I think they will bring in that expert to talk about the dynamics of a domestic violence relationship, because it does bring out different characteristics in people, especially the longer it goes on. So her, sometimes initiating those fights, you just get so upset, and the only thing you can do is a brief lash out. You know what's coming, but sometimes, again, that evil that you know is better than the evil that you don't know. So even though she knew what would happen to her, she still had to get her emotions out. So I think they'll bring in somebody that really understands the dynamic of that relationship and psychologically what it can do to the victim.
Right. So Claudia, does it surprise you at all to hear that she's saying, yeah, sometimes I would start the fights?
It doesn't at all, because I myself have done the same thing in a similar situation. So sometimes it sounds crazy, but that's the only control that you have, is starting that fight. And again, even though you know it's not going to end up in a good place for you, it's the only thing that you have to give yourself even that slightest bit of power that that person has taken away from you.
Oh, Claudia, such great insight. Thank you for that. John, let me ask you, please, about this civil lawsuit, how the terms of the settlement, some of them at least, came out. The money amount came out on Wednesday. Cassie Ventura admitted that she agreed to settle that suit for $20 million. It was settled 24 hours after she filed. She told the jury about the book that she wrote in 2023 about her life. She said that she sent the book to Combs and told him that he could buy the rights to it for $30 million. John, how do you think that the defense might use these facts against her on their cross?
Fantastic lawyer Keith Mitnick always talks about in his trial presentations, embrace the horror, right? Like when it's your case, you've got to address the bad facts. And this is a bad fact for the prosecutors, but they have to address it. Because because it does, there is some level of like reverse extortion and look, we can resolve this and you can have all the rights, but I need $30 million. And then ultimately they settled for $20 million. But it's certainly going to be a feature upon her cross-examination and use it as impeachment to say, well, you were just trying to, make money off of this. You started fights because you wanted more information for your book, right? And, you took liberties in your book. And if I'm the defense, like I'm going line by line through that book and finding falsehoods or misstatements or overstatements.
Sure. And that is their job. No, I know you do a tremendous job, John, if you were on that team representing him. Thank you for all of that. Claudia, let me ask you, please, to answer a question that I am commonly getting now that this case has started. I bet you are as well, where people who are looking at it going, well, my gosh, why didn't she just leave? She is gorgeous. She is talented. She is smart. You look at her and you think, gosh, why did she stay with him? What's the answer to that?
She is all those things to us. And during that time, she felt none of those things. She felt most likely worthless, ugly, like no one else would want her, because that's how Sean wanted her to feel, and that's how he made her feel. So every humiliation, every degradation that he did to her tore her down just a little bit more. So even though we see an amazing human being, she didn't feel that way. She felt nobody else would want her. She would not be able to make any money and support herself, and that she wasn't worth even trying to do something good for herself.
Claudia, these explainers help so much. It really does, because I think God bless anybody who's never been in a DV relationship. I hope you never enter one, but it's very hard to understand without having that experience or working in the criminal justice system. John, I know you understand the dynamic so well. And one of the things that came out yesterday, as you both know, that I think shocked America, well, maybe some of America's, many of us kind of read about this and we're like, when Kid Cudi's car got blown up, and we learned yesterday that Cassie was dating Kid Cudi, and Diddy got jealous, according to her, and said to her that his car would be blown up, and then sure enough, it was. John, when we think about dangerousness at play here in this is going far beyond the relationship to other people by the testimony. I want to get your thoughts on it, please.
When everything's at stake and people have essentially unlimited resources and unlimited power, which Diddy had at a point, like he was one of the central icons in American, pop culture. It changes people, and certainly, there's always been some smoke about some East Coast, West Coast, and Diddy's role in some of the shootings, and he was the mogul. He was the guy that was kind of making decisions. I mean, he's even tied to Tupac's story, and
yes.
And so like he has a very powerful and scary set of resources, and the people in his life were afraid of that. And sometimes you're afraid of the perception, but sometimes you're afraid of the reality. And here, his reality was pretty dang close to his perception. And I don't know that we'll ever know, what he had done within, a degree or two of remoteness.
John, great points. My ears are wide open. I have to say, I'm so glad you brought up Tupac Shakur's name. As we know, there's the case pending for his murder, and we know that the defendant charge has pointed the finger through his defense at Diddy. So I wouldn't be surprised if his name comes up. As you both know, Suge Knight's name already came up. Talk about a hardened gangster. There's one right there. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to leave the Diddy discussion here for now, but we'll revisit it in just a short while. John Phillips, Claudia King, stand by, please. We're going to hit a break. When we come back, we're turning to Massachusetts as Officer John O'Keefe's niece testified about the relationship between her uncle and the defendant. The question we're asking this morning, will it help establish motive for the murder charge the Commonwealth is seeking to prove. Plus,
the people are just going to Google it, and then we're going to have the same exact problem we had getting a jury for that case. We're going to have the same exact problem.
Are you done? Are you just going to keep... Okay, how do we screen for if people have heard about you if we don't include your name?
That judge is awesome. He is snapping back at Cult Mom in court, and we are here for it. We're going to spotlight their back and forth coming up this morning for you on Opening Statements. Don't go away.
Is Karen Reed a killer girlfriend?
She's guilty.
Or the scapegoat in an elaborate cover-up?
Karen Reed was free!
Karen Reed is accused of murdering her police officer boyfriend.
And it's stated repeatedly, I hit him, I hit him.
She may end up taking the stand. Her first trial ended with a hung jury.
They haven't proven anything.
Will a jury finally agree on a verdict? We know who did it.
The Karen Reed murder retrial. Live coverage today on Court TV.
Would you consider those text messages as you reviewed them when you received them from Brian Higgins as being flirtatious or romantic in nature?
I would not categorize them to that extent. My opinion is that it's a angry girlfriend trying to set up a hookup to her John.
The retrial for defendant Karen Reed is what's trending this morning in true crime, with prosecutors focusing in on the strained relationship between defendant Karen Reed and victim John O'Keefe. O'Keefe's niece was the first witness to take the stand on Wednesday, describing the conflict between Reed and O'Keefe right before his death, saying in part, quote, "They were fighting a lot, usually more towards the night. I remember John saying our relationship was good, but it had run its course, and the defendant was very upset by it, recalling one of the fights, saying, quote, he asked her to leave." And then the prosecutor says, well, how did the defendant respond? And John's niece says she did not want to leave the house. Well, before O'Keefe's niece took the stand, prosecutors presented 2 interview clips from Karen Reed, one from Dateline, one from Investigation Discovery, which seemed to be painting a picture of a fractured relationship between the two.
There's 81 over here that you guys have really been going at it. And this was sort of like a last date element to it. Was that going on?
That was not that. Don't get it clear to me. I'm never breaking up with you. I don't see how John would have known about my text with Brian. And I'm not sure if he knew he would have reacted very strongly. I think we would have broken up, but I don't think John would have lost it and caused a fight. I didn't feel like John's emotions with me got really strong.
So the question we're asking this morning, does a pending breakup help the second-degree murder charge? Let's talk about it. I want to bring in high-profile criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Michael J. Brown, and the creator and the host of the show Road Patrol Live, nationally known radio host John DePietro. Good morning to you both. John, you've been in the courtroom covering this case. You were in there yesterday watching John's niece very closely. Take us back into the courtroom and tell us about some of the things that you were able to observe.
And, you know, there's a lot of emotion in the courtroom, but one of the things that I felt actually yesterday was anger, only because of, as you were listening to this, she was 14 at the time, and what she had to deal with Karen Reed, think of what she has gone through, lost her both parents, now being raised by the uncle, and an atmosphere where Karen Reed would cause drama, where Karen Reed would cause problems when she came over to the house. John O'Keefe shared with his niece he was embarrassed that she would raise her voice and start fighting in front of them. Just the sheer inability to realize how she should be dealing with this young girl who has now blossomed into a young woman. Julie, it was so emotional with the jury. I could see the jury kind of shaking their head in disappointment in hearing of this type of behavior. She'd give her the cold shoulder. She favored her brother. And then you could also tell she really has not, I believe hasn't shared what happened that morning with a lot of people. Because you could see, Julie, as she started to relive it, it's a very painful moment. This is a 14-year-old girl, and this woman, you know, who's caused a lot of havoc in her home, and she's intoxicated and screaming and waking her up at 4:30 in the morning and saying things like, you know, he got hit by a plow, or, you know, maybe I hit him, and just acting so frantic and bizarre. And you could see the visible scar it's had on this young woman, and it really shook the jury. She deserves a lot of credit. She has been through so much, but it was so embarrassing, and it was mortifying to hear. Even before that happened, the general behavior of Karen Reed, who would, you know, be drinking. You know, sometimes people drink, they talk louder. You have to tell them, keep their voice down. That moment that she shared, that John O'Keefe said to her, listen, I know this has been difficult. It's very uncomfortable that she argued in front of you. Don't worry, like, I'm going to break up with her. This thing has run its course. And then, you know, we know what happened on that fateful night.
John, such great descriptions from you from the courtroom. We knew you would have them for us. Thank you for all of that. I want to key in on some of what John's niece testified to regarding that Aruba trip we hear a lot about. So this is some weeks before John is killed. He and Karen, the kids, they all go to Aruba, and here's some details we pulled. The niece saying that her Uncle John went to his room, closed the door, the defendant was banging on the door. There was cold tension in the home between John and the defendant afterward, and that the arguments would continue occurring a few times a week. And so, Michael J. Brown, we want to ask you, we know that when we couple this information from the niece with the text messages the jury's already seen between the defendant and the victim on the day that he's killed, and how they're fighting all day long, does this paint a picture of a breakup to you? And if so, does that help prosecutors in any way with the highest charge that they've brought here, the murder charge?
You bet it does, Julie. So what you now have is, not only does it show the breakup, but it actually shows that the victim is the one who wanted the defendant out of the relationship and out of that house. And that's a big deal. It's not just a mutual breakup, but it's, I want her out of the house. This has run its course. We're done. And now you got this very spiteful, angry, hostile defendant is what's being portrayed. And that absolutely goes to motive. Now, as we all know, motive is never an element of the crime, but juries love to hear motive. That's a big deal for a jury because they're giving the defendant the benefit of the doubt. They're looking at, they're assuming that there's innocent explanations. But when you have this motive come into play, now they look at her in a different light. And I think what John just described about how the witness testified in the courtroom, because it wasn't on television because of her age, that's a big deal. Because now what you have is this really, what's portrayed as a crazed defendant who's out of her mind to some extent. It's a big deal, and it's an important piece of the puzzle for the prosecution.
Michael, thank you for your expertise on that. John, let me go back to you, please, on the story that the Commonwealth is sharing with the jury and how they're weaving Karen Reed's clips throughout the progression of the trial. And yesterday, before John's niece got on the stand, there were 2 clips played. We just played them before we brought you and Michael in. And in the latter clip, where she's saying that she didn't think that John knew about her text messaging with Brian Higgins, but even if he were to know, she wouldn't think he would get upset about it. I saw that and I'm going, doesn't that chip away at this whole defense theory? I would love your thoughts on that, John.
Absolutely, Julie. And those Karen clips, to me, they're just the story of the courtroom. You know, it shows a lot of different things. It also shows the inconsistencies, the narrative that Karen Reed has tried to put out, and then they play clips where she even contradicts herself. And Julie, yesterday, where the niece was also so tremendous to me with the Commonwealth is she talked about Jen McCabe on the scene. She talked about Jen McCabe had been her basketball coach. Kerry Roberts on the scene. The niece basically solidified what Jen McCabe and Kerry Roberts had testified to. She also said Jen McCabe was very level-headed, trying to keep herself, you know, grounded during this whole episode. It was a very powerful moment when the cousins of John O'Keefe's niece came in to the courtroom to show support for her. These are just young children. And Julie, as much as we've heard about Peg O'Keefe, who sits there each morning, and the brother, what the jury saw yesterday, this is someone directly impacted, that this young girl lost her mother, lost her father. Finally, they're trying to have some element of stability, and then her life was thrown into chaos again because of the actions of the defendant.
John, such a perfect point to end on, how John O'Keefe's niece is a victim in this case. And we certainly don't want to forget that there are other victims besides Officer John O'Keefe, the decedent, and his niece is certainly one of them. Thank you for all that great reporting. John DePietro, will let you go to get into the courtroom today. We'll look forward to having you back on the show soon. Michael J. Brown's coming with us. Please do the same at home. Here's what's coming up for you on Opening Statements.
You denied every single one of my motions for a year and a half that I've been here. Every single one of my motions has been denied. And have any of those motions not have merit? You've denied every single motion.
I think I was here this morning about 15 minutes ago when I granted your motion to meet with your attorneys over the lunch hour.
Oh, Cult Mom just can't help herself, right? Arguing with the judge who's going to preside over her attempted homicide case. We'll show you those tense moments when we come back. And we're going to New York City. Even though there are no cameras allowed in the courtroom where Diddy's case is happening, we're getting creative. We're using AI and the courtroom transcripts. We're marrying them so you can get a real feel for what the witnesses are saying. It's pretty remarkable. We'll share a sample for you coming up. In our spotlight this morning, Lori Daybell being Lori Daybell as she chastises the judge who's overseeing her next trial. Daybell appearing in court on Wednesday for a pretrial hearing for the attempted murder of her niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreaux. She was recently convicted for a conspiracy to commit murder in the death of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow. Daybell had words for the judge who's presiding over her case.
Your Honor?
Yes.
I would have to ask that you would recuse yourself from the obvious personal bias that you have against me and send us to master calendar for this scheduling of a trial. You denied every single one of my motions for a year and a half that I've been here. Every single one of my motions has been denied. And have any of those motions not have merit? You've denied every single motion.
I think I was here this morning about 15 minutes ago when I granted your motion to meet with your attorneys over the lunch hour. I have granted other motions of yours. Okay?
That's the first motion that you've ever granted.
I could watch this for hours. How about her talking about send this to the master calendar? Okay, her trial is going to begin in just a couple of weeks. And it seems by what we saw on Wednesday that she's going to be representing herself. But of course, she's got time to change her mind on that. So let's talk about it. Is it smart to ask the judge who's going to preside over your trial to recuse himself and then accuse him of being biased against you? Let's bring in our legal eagles, John Phillips and Michael J. Brown here. Lori Daybell being Lori Daybell. John, what's your reaction to what we just watched?
Oh, boy, Lori Daybell. Good morning, Michael. So, you know, anytime you're faced with that recusal question, it's always tough. Like, I've had to do it. Everybody has had to do it. You know, if you put it all out there and lose, you're in a worse shape than you were in because you've just accused the judge of being biased. Here, I don't even know that it's going to faze him because he sees, you know, what's going on. And black letter law, every state, every federal court, you can't recuse a judge because of prior rulings. Like, you know, you can't say you've ruled against me, so you should be recused. You have to show a level of bias and you know, favoritism, which rulings, you know, don't you know, necessarily correlate to. But it's here we go. You know, get ready for the craziness.
Oh, yeah, buckle up. It's going to happen in a couple of weeks. I have another clip. This might have been one of the best moments of that hearing. Michael J. Brown, I want to get your reaction on the other side. Here we go.
The people are just going to Google it, and then we're going to have the same exact problem we had getting a jury for that case. We're going to have the same exact problem.
Are you done? Are you just going to keep... Okay. How do we screen for if people have heard about you if we don't include your name?
So she doesn't want her name listed on the case. I can't even, the people of Arizona, versus Lori Vallow Daybell. I don't know what name she wants in place of that, but she's afraid of what's going to turn up with a Google. Michael J. Brown, what do you think?
Julie, I think this judge should get a raise. So, judges, judges really go under the radar a lot of times. They don't get the appreciation and the words that they should get, because usually they're there and they're doing their job. When you're faced, and John knows this, in a pro se situation like the Darrell Brooks case, that judge was phenomenal how she handled him. This judge has tremendous patience, and I'm confident that he's going to go through this trial in a professional manner. He'll maintain his demeanor and do a great job. And it's a very, very difficult thing to do, especially when you have a defendant like this. One thing is to have a pro se defendant, another is when you have a loose cannon like in this case. But he is doing a great job, and I'm confident, like I said, he is going to follow this thing through to the end.
Right. He's treated her with so much professionalism and respect. It's baffling to me. Well, maybe it's not baffling, because consider the source. John Phillips, what do you think this move is really about for her? Like the move to go after the judge so close to her trial date coming up in early June. What purpose might she think this is serving?
I mean, how many times has this been said in different ways on court TV? If you have the law on your side, argue the law. If you have the facts on your side, argue the facts. If you have neither, just yell at the judge. Just do whatever you got to do. And certainly there's a side of Lori Daybell, we've seen it, that's pretty meticulous, that is smart, that can do this. And I've been in court where lawyers pulled some of the same shenanigans. She's watching probably the wrong court TV shows, not court TV actually, but kind of fake court TV, the scripted stuff. But I just think she's preserving appellate rights in her mind, even though they're not great. Hopefully she watches Michael and me a little more and kind of learns how to handle herself in court.
Watch this show.
We'll just go from there.
I'll teach you a couple things, Mom. Perfect segue, John Phillips. Michael J. Brown, if you could give her some advice right now, knowing that it's not too late to use standby counsel as the role of acting attorney, what would you say to her if you had just a couple of minutes to advise her on this?
Yeah. I mean, the real issue is you can't represent yourself. I mean, that's the golden rule, and we know that. Keep in mind, she has absolutely nothing to lose. I hate saying that. She's been convicted time and time again. She's going to serve the rest of her life behind bars. She has nothing to lose, and I think she really does enjoy, unfortunately, her 15 minutes and maybe a little more of fame, and that's what she's doing. And she's just going to rile the judge as much as she can, and I think, and again, going back to that point, I'm confident he's going to maintain his professionalism. They're going to see this case to the end, and she's going to have a 4th or 5th life sentence. She has nothing to lose, unfortunately.
Great points. I know I have to let you both go. You have cases to win. Michael J. Brown, John Phillips, thank you both so much for your insight and expertise. We'll see you both back here next Thursday morning. And coming up next here on Opening Statements, here's what we've got.
Approximately how many bottles of baby oil would be used in a typical freak-off? A lot. I would say definitely somewhere close to 10.
Oh my, we're going inside the Diddy courtroom with a little help from AI. Plus, a live look at the courtroom in Dedham, Massachusetts, where defendant Karen Reed's retrial is set to begin shortly.
All this week, Vinnie Politan is live from Dedham, Massachusetts for the Karen Reed trial.
We'll be on location talking Karen Reed with a live studio audience.
Closing arguments tonight, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Just look at that touch from Trinity Rodman.
Saturday night.
When she is on the field, she changes the game.
Saturday night.
Saturday night is our night.
The new Saturday Night Out is on ION all season long.
Now for what's tipping the scales of justice, it is the jaw-dropping testimony inside Sean Diddy Combs' trial. Cameras not allowed in the courtroom, but through AI, we can help show you what went down. Take a listen to this exchange between male strippers manager Daniel Phillip and Assistant U.S. Attorney Maureen Comey. That's James Comey's daughter. Keep in mind, the audio is AI, but the words are taken directly from the court transcript.
What did Cassie Ventura give you money for in and around 2012?
To have sex with her. We were standing in like a foyer, and she basically said it was her birthday and that her husband wanted to do something special for her. And so she asked me if I would mind rubbing baby oil on her and giving her a massage. And, you know, wherever things went from there, if, you know, based on how comfortable I was.
What was the man wearing?
A white robe with a bandana over his face and like a baseball cap on his head.
How, if at all, did Ms. Ventura refer to the man in the room?
As babe.
So when he spoke to you, whose voice did you recognize?
That was Sean Combs.
Had you heard Sean Combs' voice before?
Yes.
In what context?
In every form I've ever seen him in entertainment.
Across all of these encounters after the first one, who, if anyone, gave directions about how to engage in sexual activity?
Sean Combs did.
When you say you saw him hit her, who did you see hit whom?
Sean Combs hit Cassie. He, Mr. Combs, came out of the room and I just saw a bottle fly past her and hit the wall.
What kind of bottle?
It looked like a liquor bottle. And then he, Mr. Combs, walked over to her, to Cassie. He grabbed her by her hair and started dragging her by her hair into her bedroom.
Oh my, and that's just a little sampling of what's been shared. I'm going to bring in domestic violence expert and former law enforcement officer Claudia King. Claudia, what do you think when you hear this escort's testimony corroborating Cassie's testimony?
I think it really gives credibility to what they're all saying, and then we have the video on top of that to corroborate. So I think it just lends all of them credibility, which is great for the case.
Right. You're exactly right, because when we saw Cassie's lawsuit filed, it was very stunning. There was even a warning on the lawsuit about how graphic the details were that the lawsuit entails. And, you know, many people may be looking at that going, I don't know, can I believe it? I mean, here, if you don't believe this, I can't understand why not. You have this independent witness corroborating, as you noted, we've got video of it. Tell me, Claudia, in terms of laying the foundation, we talked a little bit on the program yesterday about how to lay those building blocks in order to prove sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution, and ultimately the racketeering conspiracy. How do you think the government is doing so far?
So far, so good. You know, I think they put the right witnesses in the right order to start the case. So, you know, they had one witness, then they brought in Mr. Phillip. So he was able to tell a great part of the story that's now being corroborated by Cassie. So I think she's really painting the picture of their relationship, the sexual acts that transpired, and now we're just going to build from there. So we got a long way to go, but I think the prosecution is doing a fantastic job with the way they've laid out the witnesses thus far.
Claudia, I think you're exactly right. Cassie seems very believable, and we've got a little clip of some of her AI testimony. So we put it together using AI. Here's what she said. Here we go.
Why did you continue to engage in freak-offs with Sean?
He would ask me. He would bring it up at random times. And I think, to a point, I just didn't feel like I had much of a choice. I didn't really know what no would be or what no could turn into.
When you say you didn't know what no could turn into, what do you mean by that?
Making him angry, very honestly, also making him uncomfortable, that I knew this thing and that I no longer wanted to do it.
Claudia, where she says she didn't feel like she had a choice, as a DV expert, what does she mean by that?
She means that she knows what will happen or what likely will happen if she does refuse what he wants. And also she is kind of leaning, giving us a little information about how she felt about herself. Again, she doesn't have a choice to leave. She feels like she doesn't have a choice to get away, so she doesn't have a choice other than to do what he's asking, but we know really telling her to do.
You know, you touched on this a little bit earlier. I think it's such an important point to underscore, as so many of us look at Cassie and think, my gosh, she is gorgeous and talented and smart and just has the world going for her. Inside, you said that's not how she felt. Tell us more why.
So she talked one time about being a people pleaser, and that's often what these abusers will look for. Somebody who has a people pleasing aspect or a little kind of chink in their armor that they can weasel their way into. So they begin to tear that person down. And so inside, that victim feels worthless because they're told they're worthless. They're told that nobody else will love you other than me. Nobody else will care about you. You are trash. Look at what you've done. You've had sex with these other men right in front of me. Who do you think you are? So he's telling Cassie what to do, and then he's turning right around and using it against her. So he's pulling on everything inside of her to bring her down. She has no self-esteem left, so she feels like, I'm not worth anything, so why would I leave?
Claudia, this insight is so helpful because while we can all envision the physical abuse, and the jury saw photos of her bruises and injuries to her beautiful face, I'm sure it was sickening to look at, to see that. But to visualize what you just described, the emotional, mental abuse, that's also a component with domestic violence, isn't it?
It's often the worst component and the most difficult to heal from. Bruises heal, broken bones heal, but those internal scars can take years, if ever, to really, really heal. I bet Cassie today, in her current relationship, apologizes way more than she needs to because she still has that piece inside of her that feels responsible for everything and constantly says, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. That's one thing that victims often do for a long time. So those emotional scars are really, really difficult to heal and are often worse than the physical.
Claudia, I could talk to you all day about this. You know, I've, from working in the domestic violence prevention movement, often heard survivors will say, look, like, I knew if I could just get through the beating wouldn't be so bad. But it was the mental torture in between that sometimes would drive me to feeling crazy. What's that like when someone makes you feel crazy?
It's crazy because you can't trust yourself anymore. You can't even trust your own intuition, your own judgment. And I experienced that myself when I finally decided to leave my relationship. I went to a therapist to ask her if I was making the right decision because I didn't trust my own at that point. So that's what victims often feel. They can't even trust their own insight, their judgment, their intuition. They feel that worthless and gaslit, and they just don't even know where to turn.
Can't even know if they're making a smart decision. This is so helpful. Claudia King, you're going to be back with us at 10 a.m. The trial's going to be underway then. So, of course, we'll talk more about Diddy and the Karen Reed case. Thank you so much for the great expertise and insight this morning. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to hit a break. If you like this episode of Opening Statements, guess what? You can watch it again. You can share it. We put it up on courttv.com every day. Just click on that Shows tab.